My name is Brock, and this is the Dungeon Master's Toolkit podcast. Hello, and welcome to the first episode of 2023. On today's episode is going to be a little bit different. We're going to talk about how the show did this previous year, some of the things we're looking forward to doing in the coming year, and then I also have a project that I'm going to be starting, and I'm going to read one of the entries at the end of the episode, so you can look forward to that. How did we do this last year in 2022? We put out 1,400 minutes of content across 27 episodes, and that gives us a total of 62 episodes. So over essentially 2 seasons, 62 episodes. That's really awesome. I believe there's a statistic floating around out there saying that most podcasts, like 95%, don't get past, I think it's 10 episodes. So to be at 62 episodes, we're doing very, very well. We were heard in 34 different countries, and we were in the top 30% of most shared podcasts. So I think that just means that our followers were actually sharing out the episode. So that's awesome. Thank you guys for helping the podcast grow. And our listenership also has grown by 300%. So we had quite a good year. And some of those percentages are a little wonky if you don't know the numbers behind them. So to get an idea of kind of where the show is sitting at, the show, the total number of plays across the podcasting side of things alone, so not including YouTube, is about 11,000 plays. So that's a lot of listens, and that's a lot of hours of content that's being consumed. So that's very, very exciting. Each episode is averaging around 150 plays or so, and that's grown. I think at the beginning of the year, it was closer to maybe 100 per episode. So as we've been releasing content, we've been steadily getting more and more consistency in terms of which episodes or how much episodes are getting viewed. There is always that hit or miss episode that will do wildly better than many of the other ones, but for the most part, 150 plays per episode, still pretty good. So we are still a fairly small podcast, but we do have a good chunk of people listening, and we are growing. So that is awesome. Now, with 2022 out of the way, let's talk about what we're going to be doing in 2023. So really what the podcast is built on is the interviews. So we're going to keep going forward with the schedule that we've been doing so far. So every other week, we're going to release an episode of an interview, and that's going to be our standard 45 minutes to an hour episode. So I'm going to keep doing that. The every other week schedule is just a little bit easier for me to hit consistently. As we continue to grow, I would like to get back into an every single week release, but we're not quite there yet. I've also got that project that I mentioned. We're going to talk about that here. That project is going to also have episodes being released through the podcast. So these are going to be smaller episodes, probably 15 to 20 minutes, or maybe 10 to 20 minutes. And I'm hoping to release these every single week. If not, I'll be releasing them on the off week of the podcast. So we should have content coming out every single week. It's just not going to be a full-on interview every single week. And I am still very early with this project, so hopefully everything works out. But let's jump into it and talk about what this project is. So the kind of code name for the project is Shrines and Standing Stones. This is subject to change, as if I think of something better, that's kind of what it started as. And it is essentially a system agnostic supplement. And it's kind of going to be like a book of random tables or a random table of shrines, standing stones, altars, obelisks, weird ancient structures that players may be able to interact with. This was inspired by a contest from the Discern Reality podcast that was done several years ago. I think I listened to this podcast maybe 4 years ago. They did a contest where they designed these shrines in the context of Dungeon World. And they essentially described the shrine and they built a mechanical move that the players could do. And then they did a contest and I think they featured like the top three in one of their zines that they were putting out. But I really liked the structure of this small, kind of localized area. There's some objects and stuff that the players can interact with, and they have some mechanics that go along with it. And I want to kind of emulate that feeling of those shrines, essentially, that they were building, and turn it into an entire supplement. So, what you could do with this book is say your players go somewhere and you say, I need to have a random shrine here or a random just weird thing that they encounter. And with no prep, you could just pick up the book, flip to a random page, and there you have it. You have a 2-page spread. One page as the description of the location and kind of what that place is about. And then the second page has a description of the mechanics and what the players need to do to interact with it and what the effects are based on their roles. Now, I mentioned that this is going to be system agnostic. The roles will be made with the D20. The rules will be included right along with the text. So you don't really need anything else as far as mechanics go. It's all going to be right in the book. A couple of examples could be the Shrine of the Raven King or the Altar of the Fallen God, which is the one that I'm going to share with you at the end of this episode. Each of these shrines will have some way to interact with them. I mentioned there would be some mechanics, and there's going to be I love the partial mechanics that you get from Powered by the Apocalypse style games, and I wanted to include that. So you're going to essentially have a success mechanic for what happens if you fully succeed at your role. There'll be a partial success mechanic if you don't roll as high, but still high enough to be considered a success. And then there's always going to be a failure option as well. So this could be damaging to the players or could cause some other ill effects, right? So they have the chance to gain something by making a roll on this, but there's also going to be some level of consequences, and some may be more dangerous than others, depending on what the shrine is all about. So the way that this is going to apply to the podcast is while I'm writing these entries, I'm also going to be recording and talking about the actual entries, right? So I'm going to read an entry and then go through kind of a behind the scenes of what I was thinking when I was writing this entry and maybe some extra DM notes or how DMs could integrate it into their world, just kind of some behind the scenes stuff. And that's essentially what that 10 to 20 minute episode is going to be that I'm going to be trying to release every single week. So you get this bite-sized piece of information and something that you can maybe pull right into your game from the start. I'm going to be releasing these throughout the year. My current goal is to be writing one of these entries every single day. So for the first 2 months of the year, I'm going to be doing most of my writing, is my hopes. And then I'm going to be staggering the releases of these audio podcasts throughout the year. So 52 weeks, that should give us, almost the full 60 that I'm planning to do. And then we will go from there. If I have extras, I might squeeze them in various places as well. And the text version, the PDF version, essentially, of these entries are going to be going onto my Patreon, which is the next thing that I wanted to talk about. So if you're interested in supporting this show above and beyond just listening and sharing the episodes out, which is already fantastic, you'll be able to pick up the PDF versions of each of these entries out on the Patreon each week as they're released. One of the things that I want to do with this coming year is to focus on the Patreon and to focus on growing the podcast and the channel, the community as a whole. These episodes do take a fair amount of time to put together. Each episode is right around 3 hours to produce, from recording to editing to scheduling and publishing. So there's a lot of time that goes into it. And then I also have various software licensing and costs and all that fun stuff. And I really don't like to, I don't like the self marketing aspect of this, and I don't like to ask people to support the show as much, but it's something that I'm going to try to focus on a little bit more this coming year, because any support that we get is going to make episodes more frequent and higher quality. And I think we can all agree that that is just a good thing all around. So I'm hoping to provide some value over on Patreon with those PDF releases. And then I also will be doing some one-shot giveaways. So that's my other goal over there, is I want to play some more games. And what better way to do it than to reward patrons by giving away one-shots? And essentially, my first patron that I get will win the first one shot, and I will work with them to figure out what system we want to do it in, what the theme of the one shot is, and I will basically create a one shot for them and up to 3 other players, and then I will run that for them. So we'll kind of work on the scheduling one on one with that whenever that happens. And then as the Patreon grows, I have multiple goals. When we hit those, we'll do a giveaway. So one of the patrons will get another one shot, and we'll just kind of keep doing that as we get bigger and bigger. I think that should be a lot of fun. As far as the Patreon goes for tiered rewards, I'm going to leave everything pretty much the same. So there will be multiple tiers that people can support at, but the rewards won't really change from tier to tier. So if you support at the $1 level, you'll get the same as if you support at the $10 level. That's just going to be easier on me. And it seems like a lot of the creators that I've looked at on Patreon have a similar setup, and they seem to be doing pretty good that way. So just leaving it open to everybody to support at whatever level is available to them. One last note on this Shrines and Standing Stones project is that I know that the random table kind of homebrew thing that we've been doing at the end of a handful of the previous episodes has been going over very well. And as I'm going forward, I'm looking at taking the interviews that I'm doing and adding on an extra 20 to 30 minutes at the end to record somewhat of a separate homebrew chunk with that guest. And then possibly coming up with more shrines or potentially monsters, encounters, locations, whatever. So if you are interested in being on the show or coming on and just kind of creating some content like that with me, let me know. It's been a lot of fun. So I think people can look forward to that. And that's obviously not going to be every single guest. It'll depend on what kind of time we have to do recordings, but it has gone over very well. So I'm excited to try to do more of that. Once we get a little bit farther into this Shrines and Standing Stones project, we also will be trying to do either a crowdfunding campaign or a just straight to self-publish through drive-through or somewhere for this book. So I would really like to have a physical copy of this be printed. So just look forward to that as we continue moving forward. And if anybody has ideas for shrines or anything, feel free to let me know or share them on the Discord server. That's all I have for this first episode of 2023. I hope everybody has a great new year, and I am looking forward to each and every one of the interviews that we'll be doing over the course of the year and the projects that we get to do. And with that, let's jump over and talk about the obelisk of the fallen god. So, with the obelisk of the fallen god, I am going to read the description and then I will chat about the mechanics. Found underground, the obelisk of the fallen god is a truly extraordinary and ancient artifact. Its surface is made of a smooth, metallic material that is marred by burn marks and other signs of damage, as if it had plummeted from the sky and crash landed where it now stands. The obelisk is surrounded by rubble, giving further evidence to the theory that it fell from above. Upon closer inspection, one can't help but be mesmerized by the intricate foreign runes that cover the surface of the obelisk. These runes emit a soft, otherworldly glow, some twinkling like stars in the night sky. As travelers approach the obelisk, the runes seem to flutter and brighten, as if they are reacting to the presence of living beings. At the top of the obelisk, a single large circle of light appears to move about like a giant eye, inspecting each and every visitor. The obelisk speaks in a low, monotonous voice, using whatever language is most familiar to the listener. It answers questions of those brave enough to seek its guidance. The eye seems to pulse with each word that is spoken, adding to the otherworldly and mystical aura of the artifact. So, DM note, the obelisk is a sentient AI from a crashed spacecraft. Upon further investigation, the players may be able to find other artifacts or parts of the original spacecraft. So, this came about. I always thought the idea of the fallen god being a crashed spaceship and some sort of a sentient AI. So, that's where this one came from. I had to share this one first because I think it's my favorite thus far. And let's talk about the mechanics. So this one is very simple and very straightforward for mechanics, and the success mechanics may change a little bit in terms of the numbers that are needed to roll. But to start off, a success is a 17 plus, a partial success is a 10 plus, and then a miss or a failure is 9 or less. When you ask the obelisk about a person, place, object, or event, roll 1d20. On a success, the obelisk shares factual information. On a partial success, the obelisk shares its knowledge, but it is incomplete, vague, or potentially incorrect, and will notify you of the uncertainty. On a miss, the obelisk's power is spent, the eye disappears, and the runes fade to a dim flicker. The obelisk remains in this state for 2d4 days. So here we have an artifact that is a sentient AI, and it has, over the course of the years that it has been crash landed there, people have come to it and conversed with it and told it information and told it rumors and asked it questions, and it has essentially learned all of the languages in the area. Thus, it can talk to any. It also has knowledge of events and items and stuff from around it because of the stories that have been shared with it. So this is something that, depending on where it's located, the players could maybe come back to occasionally to get answers. There could be a cult of people who are surrounding it and worshiping it like some sort of an oracle. It can almost be used like an oracle as well, or a way for the dungeon master to inject some information to the party. Now, when they ask a question, if they succeed, it shares factual information. So it's not necessarily omniscient. If you ask it, like, who committed this random murder, it may not know the answer to that, but it's going to give you the best possible factual information that it can. So that's DM discretion. The partial success, it shares knowledge, but it's not necessarily fully correct. It's doing its job as an artificial intelligence. It'll say, hey, here's what I know. I'm not 100% confident in the information that I'm giving you. So take that with a grain of salt. And you can present that to the players in whatever fashion you want. And you can lean as far into the sci-fi or the fantasy as you want, right? Because if you wanted them to, like, if you want the players but not the characters to know that this is like, oh, this is like a sci-fi thing, you can talk like a robot and say like data incomplete or something, very science fictiony. But if you want to play it up more as a like an oracle or something that the players wouldn't necessarily know isn't, from outer space, then you can play it more like an oracle, talk more like the fantasy characters would talk, that sort of a thing. And then on a miss, the obelisk's power is spent. And this is essentially like it's running on reserve power and it needs to recharge. So after you've asked it too many questions, power's consumed, everything powers down, and then it just kind of remains in this like sleep hibernate state for a couple of days. And as potential plot hooks, if If you want them to be able to do anything about it, you could maybe help it hook up to, fix a generator or something, or get another power source for it to stay running longer. But none of that's in this specifically. That's up to the DM to decide what they want to do. You could even have them find an entire crashed spaceship and have an entire encounter based on that. So that is the Obelisk of the Fallen God. That is just one of the many entries that will be coming out over the course of the year. And with that, I will leave you guys, and I hope you have a great 2023. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Dungeon Master's Toolkit podcast. You can find links to all of the products and resources that we talked about on the show in the show notes. And if you'd like to join the community or find out how to be on the show, check out our subreddit or join us in our Discord server.